Now that we have seen some principles of cooperative learning, let's look at some specific strategies for implementing it effectively. There are 4 main points. Include elements of both positive interdependence and individual accountability. Keep the group size small. Use cooperative learning consistently and systematically. And divide into groups intentionally. Now let's break these down in a little more detail. First, you need to consciously include elements of positive interdependence and individual accountability when you do cooperative learning work. This has several important results. First, it helps students develop responsibility for their own learning. You don't want students to constantly be waiting for the teacher to tell them what to learn and what to do. When you have positive interdependence, it requires students to work out problems themselves, to help each other, to find answers to questions. And the individual responsibility means they can't just rely on the other students to do the work for them, like in some traditional group work. Second, it helps students demonstrate what they have learned. As they work together interdependently, they have to be able to explain what they're doing to their other group members, at least to the extent that those others need it to do their work. The process of explaining to others helps cement the learning in their own minds. Now, the book includes an example of this type of work. Think of an example of a 5th grade social studies teacher who is going to have his students in a discussion. And so he teaches the students about positive interdependence and individual accountability, explains that everybody's responsible for their own learning. Then he divides up 3 roles for each group. One person is going to read a chapter aloud to the group. Another person will take notes on the key ideas from the chapter. And a third person will then ask group members a series of questions about the information and record the group's responses. Now, these are questions that the teacher has already given them. So the teacher helps the students organize themselves in groups of 3, allows the students to select their roles within the groups, then they go to work. Each student uses a computer to log into a service for note-taking. One student reads the chapter aloud, a second student types key points. The students stop occasionally, they discuss, okay, what were the key points here, and they come to an agreement on that. They also look up new vocabulary words. And then the third student, when they've finished, asks the question and records the answers to the students. Then, after each individual group has done their work, each group is asked to pair with another group and compare their key points and compare the answers to the questions. And then they can make notes on any confusing questions or any confusing points that they came up with. Then you can use these documents the next day as the students discuss the topic that they were studying. The teacher found out that the students engaged in a lot more thought, a lot higher level thinking, and more sophistication than they had done in the past because they had already grappled with the questions, they had worked it out together, they had discussed it with one another, and this gave them an opportunity to think more about their answers rather than just giving answers off the top of their head. Then finally, at the end, he asked every student to write a 2 or 3 paragraph summary of the perspectives that they came up with. So this is just one example of how you set up positive interdependence and individual accountability. Now, the second aspect of this strategy is to keep the group size small. Generally, you want to have 5 or fewer in a group. There's several reasons for this. First, if you have more than that, if you have too many in a group, it's easy for some students just to avoid involvement. They can just sit back and be passive, kind of get lost in the crowd in a sense. There are plenty of others who are going to pick up their slack. But if you have 5 or fewer, it's harder for a student to be uninvolved. Second, if you have too many students, you're going to find that some students are reluctant to speak up in a large group. You know that you have some students in a whole class setting that are reluctant to speak up. They're just shy, or for some reason or another they don't care to speak in front of large groups of people, so they rarely volunteer, and they're just intimidated by this. If you have too large of a group, they're going to have the same problem. But if you have a smaller group, a lot of times they're more willing to talk and to share their ideas. However, third, if you have too few students, you lose the benefit of having multiple voices. I mean, if you have 2 students in a group, they can bounce ideas off one another, but if you have a third one, it just adds an extra level of dynamic and provides another perspective. And if you have too few students in a group, it's harder for them to properly divide their responsibilities and roles. The third key to keep in mind with cooperative learning is to use it consistently and systematically. It takes students some time to learn how to function effectively in cooperative groups. So if you only do it sporadically, they're not going to be as effective. Students are going to have to spend time trying to figure out again what the various group roles are, how to keep discussions on topic, and so on. The book suggests using cooperative learning about once a week. This helps students get comfortable with the process. However, don't overuse it. Remember, students in your class still need individual practice and work. Things like long division, lab procedures, conjugation of Spanish verbs, and so on all need individual learning and practice. If all their time is spent in group work, they don't get that individual practice. You need to spend time, especially at the beginning of the year, explicitly teaching students how to work in groups. For one thing, define your expectations. Let them know they have to have a certain amount of work done by the end of the period. They need to show that all the members have participated, and so on. Define what you expect of them. Also, define their roles and responsibilities. Explain, for example, that someone will be doing research, another student will be taking notes, another one will be preparing a presentation, or whatever they are. You could assign roles to specific students or allow them to select them themselves as you see fit, but you need to let them know here are the jobs that are going to need to be done. So this leads to the last strategy to keep in mind. You want to divide your students into groups with intentionality. That is, you should plan how the students will be grouped, especially at the beginning of the year. You shouldn't always have the same groups all the time. For one thing, if the students are together all the time, they can get too comfortable with one another and fall into a routine which avoids individual responsibility. For example, Mary always becomes the researcher, John is always the presenter, and so on. Students need to learn how to work in a variety of responsibilities and with a variety of other personalities. Sometimes Mary might be the more outspoken one in the group, but in another group, she might be with someone who's even more outspoken, so she needs to learn how to deal with that. Generally, you should not group students by ability, putting all your bright students in one group, the slower students in another group, and so on. I mean, this is not how people work in the real world, where people with different abilities are together. The brighter students need to learn how to best work with those who are slower. And the slower students are going to profit from being with the quicker students. They'll pick up study and research skills and that type of thing. And in small groups, there are going to be times when a slower student is going to excel at his particular responsibility. Maybe he's not as quick at finding answers to questions, but he can make good presentations, so he can do a good job there. Now, if you're going to vary the groups throughout the year, you can't always divide them so neatly so that every time a group has a fast, medium, and slow student. But anyway, you want to try to vary the achievement levels in the groups. Now, there might be 3 types of groups or 3 ways you divide them into groups. Sometimes it's just an informal, on-the-spot thing where you divide them up. This might just be for a quick think, pair, share, or turn to your neighbor and explain something, or a quick grouping just to look something up. This would last no longer than a class period, even if that long. But then you're going to have more formal groups. These would be used for longer projects. And this is mostly what we've been talking about here with formal role assignments and accountability. The book also says you might have base groups. That is, you could divide your class into groups at the beginning of the year with students staying in these groups all year. And you could do this just to organize your students well. You could have them complete routine tasks like Group A, hand out all the lab safety equipment. Or they might plan activities like Group B, make arrangements with the lunchroom to order us pizza, or whatever else. But these could be a group that they always work together, even if they're not their study groups, the groups that are going to do projects and things, but they might just be groups that help the class to run more smoothly. So we've now looked at the three elements important for creating the environment for learning. Setting objectives and providing feedback was first, making it plain what the students are to learn and giving them appropriate feedback on how well they're achieving those objectives. Second, we looked at encouraging and reinforcing their effort and providing recognition when they do give appropriate effort. And finally, we saw how cooperative learning is an important tool in our classroom environment. Now, as we've said before, these three elements are not really different teaching strategies, but they should be characteristics of the classroom in general. Your class should be characterized by a focus on learning objectives, by regular recognition of effort, and by consistent use of cooperative learning. These all feed into the more specific teaching strategies we're going to examine next, as we help students develop their understanding initially, and then as we help them extend and apply that knowledge.